Okay, welcome to the second video for Paper 2, Anglo-Saxon and Norman England. This is looking at key topic 2, which is William, his control of the kingdom in those early years of his reign from 1066, mainly through to 1075 is what we're looking at here. So we're going to start off with the first key event. William had just won the Battle of Hastings. Harold Godwinson was dead, and William was expecting the remaining Anglo-Saxon nobility to surrender to him. So after the battle, William stays at Hastings, and he awaits the English aristocracy to come to him and the church leaders as well. So Archbishop of Canterbury Stigand, Edward and Morcar, amongst others as well. They do not come. They do not arrive because they decide that actually they're not going to surrender. And in fact, they propose. Stigand proposes that they should make Edgar Etheling, the teenage nephew of Edward the Confessor, the king. He's got the backing of Edward and Morcar on the Witan, so they decide to do that. So it became quite clear that they were not going to surrender. William decides that he has to take his crown by force as well. He needs to take control of London. And obviously, that is the most important step to taking control of the entirety of the country, so he can be crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey as well. So he gained control. He gained control of the south coast, so reinforcements and supplies could come through from Normandy as well, and he started to march on London as well. Obviously, his force has been depleted after the Battle of Hastings as well. We estimate there was around 7,000 Normans by this time. And around 2 million English as well. So William has to be a little bit more savvy with his kind of tactics, and he can't attack London head on, it's far too strong. So what he does is he uses a policy that he's going to use throughout his reign, particularly in the 1060s, to deal with rebels and rebellious Anglo-Saxons, and that's scorched earth policy. So this involved destroying homes, property, farms, killing livestock, killing people, anyone who got in the way, really, attacking the civilian population in order to enact the nobility to surrender. And rather than doing this head on against London, so through kind of Surrey and through the south, he attacks through a circular motion from the east as well. So he kind of goes through what is now Kent. He probably went via where Dagenham is as well in that area. We know that he stays at Barking Abbey at one point, the monastery there. We don't know when he does that, but it may have been at this stage. And he makes a kind of circular route as well. As a result of that, the people of London quickly see how serious it is, and actually that resistance is futile. And this is the exact policy that William wants as well. So the remaining earls and the archbishops surrender to him in an event we call the submission of the earls, and they do that at Berkhamsted Castle. You can see it's kind of shown there on here on the Bayeux Tapestry, which is northwest, so kind of near Watford, where Berkhamsted is as well. And this is where they swear, obviously, homage, a key thing that William will use, an oath of loyalty to him as well. So by Christmas Day, he's going to be crowned King of England, but significantly, he's going to not be crowned by Stigand, because Stigand had crowned Harold as well. Stigand also wanted Edgar Etheling to be king as well. William doesn't trust him. William will remove him as archbishop by 1070 with Lanfranc. So instead, he is crowned by the Archbishop of York. So he's still using the same ceremony. So he's legitimizing and he's showing the people of England that he is king. So he's crowned in an Anglo-Saxon manner with the holy oil and in Westminster Abbey, so the Edward the Confessor's Cathedral. He's the second monarch to be crowned there after Harold. So he is now officially King of England as well. There's a bit of commotion on his coronation. People cheer, and the Normans think that the Anglo-Saxons are causing a riot outside, and many are killed, and buildings are destroyed as well, which kind of sets the scene really for the next few years of the conquest too as well. Significantly, Edward and Morcar, obviously, who weren't at Hastings but were defeated at Gate Fulford and did not initially surrender, are pardoned, and they are allowed to retain their earldoms as well. So William significantly placing, that idea of trust, a huge thing that he also places huge emphasis on is loyalty and trust as well. So that was William's first major problem, was becoming king, legitimising the throne, and also getting the earls to submit to him as well. His next big problem is controlling the rest of the kingdom, and he sees an opportunity on the Welsh border, or the Marcher earldoms as they become known, and this is going to be a significant way for William to increase his control of England as well, whilst controlling the incursions from the Welsh border as well. So Wales was independent by this stage. It's not a part of the United Kingdom, and the Welsh had often raided the English coast, so not coast but English border, where we see kind of the site of Chester, Shrewsbury, and Hereford as well. So what William's going to do is he's going to show his control over England by creating these earldoms, but he's also going to reward his loyal followers that he promised. We know that many earls like William Fitz-Osborne and Odo gave lots of support to him, and Roger de Montgomery as well provided ships and support for when he invaded England as well. So it's a chance for him to reward these followers, but it's also a key chance for him to begin this process of colonization, or Normanization as we will call it, introducing Norman type structures, societal structures, architecture, language, culture. England will become a colony of Normandy, and the Marcher earldoms are an opportunity to do that. So Chester, Shrewsbury, Hereford, castles stop harassment, really good way in order to remember, and just to consider some of the privileges that the Marcher earls had. So most significantly is the Earl of Hereford, William Fitz-Osborne. Later on, his son Roger will lead the revolt of the Earls against William, but William Fitz-Osborne, his second right-hand man, is most significantly the Earl of Hereford. But they were allowed to build as many castles as they needed. Usually you had to get permission from William to do this, because castles create power and status, but he wants to kind of subjugate the local population, and castles are going to be a method in which William uses. They didn't have to pay tax, so all their money was going into making these earldoms really strong. Significantly, they're small. Obviously, things like the size of earldoms like Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria will become things of the past. In fact, by the end of William's reign, Mercia and Wessex no longer exist. Northumbria is half the size. Most earldoms will be small, therefore easy to manage, but he does give them these privileges, so no tax. They used obviously the sheriffs, but the Archer earls were enforcing the law as well, to really kind of tighten that Norman control as well. And they were obviously given that right to build Norman churches and Norman buildings as well. So this process of Normanization. So whilst the pretext is to control the Welsh incursions on the border, so as to stop those Welsh raids, the real reason for the creation of these earldoms is to reward those loyal followers, because if you don't reward them, they become rebellious, and also to increase and start that process of Normanization as well. So another word on castles as well. Obviously, we see the first castles that are built during the Norman conquest are the Motte and Bailey castles. These are quite crude, basic structures built from wood, but they would be extremely quick to build, 7 to 10 days. There are scenes from the Bayeux Tapestry where they're building castles as soon as William lands on the English coast in September of 1066. He builds a Motte and Bailey at Pevensey. Again, it gives him that power, it gives him that defensive base. So they're excellent defensive, but one of the big reasons why he builds them is that they cause fear and intimidation. And whilst he defeated Harold at Hastings, ultimately the Normans were the invaders and they were resented, and we know that later on, within a year or two, there are numerous rebellions against the Normans due to that resentment of the Norman takeover. So castles are a really effective strategy to enable control. We believe that there are about 80-ish, approximately, castles built during the reign of William. Some estimate between 100, some even suggest maybe even 500 castles were built, but I've always used the stat of around 80 as well. Most famously, the Tower of London, the White Tower, is built by William as well. Obviously, key area on the River Thames and in a key location in the City of London. Eventually, the Tower of London will become bigger, and a royal palace and a prison and an armory, but it is at first a Motte and Bailey built under William. Colchester Castle, anyone's ever been there, becomes the largest castle in Europe because it's built on the foundations of the old Roman temple, so it's absolutely huge again, and we see this across the rest of England as well, particularly in the north of England as well. The Motte is the mound. You had the keep at the top, and the Bailey was the lower part here, where you would find obviously soldiers' lodgings, stables, blacksmiths. Some would have a moat around it. You've got the drawbridge, the wooden palisade as well, and the kind of bridge going up to the keep as well. Not all would be converted to stone, but many would over time. So we've already talked about the issue of rebellions, and these. So from 1068 through to 1071, there are a series of major rebellions against Norman rule from the Anglo-Saxons, and particularly from the north of England as well. Why do they happen? We've already talked about the resentment of the Norman takeover. We see a lot of changes in land holding. We'll talk more about that in the third video in key topic 3, in the consolidation of power. But many Anglo-Saxon thanes are removed, and obviously, if you're going to reward your loyal followers, you need land to give them. William takes more land. 60% is technically a demesne. That word that meant directly owned, and he starts to divvy out this land. So a lot of Anglo-Saxons are frustrated that they're being removed as well, and there's that desire for Edgar Atheling to be king, an Anglo-Saxon rather than a foreign invader as well. As we can see here, there are lots of rebellions, but the main ones we focus on is initially the rebellion in 1068 from Edwin and Morcar, the 2 rebellions in the north of England in January, in Durham particularly, and in the summer of 1069, mainly focused around York and Durham as well. And then 1070, we have that other rebellion as well, which is not to do with the north, but it's Ely down here near Peterborough as well, near Cambridgeshire, with Herod of the Wake as well. So the key thing when looking at the rebellions is there obviously are a lot of them, but it's key to know why they were rebelling, and how William deals with them, and to look for those nuances really every time we look at that as well. So generally speaking, the resentment towards the Norman takeover is the main reason. The rebellion of 1068, though, under Edwin and Morcar, obviously is quite significant because initially William had promised Edwin and Morcar that they could retain their earldoms of Mercia and Northumbria, but within 2 years they have broken that link, and William has to deal with this quite severely in the end because that trust that was developed has been broken as well. William was also not a saint though. He'd broken his promise to Edwin. He said that Edwin could marry his daughter, obviously would have given Edwin a more secure position. William decided against that. It seems that he'd replaced Morcar eventually as well, and we know that Waltheof becomes the Earl of Northumbria. And there was some dislike towards some of the land being taken away and given to people like Odo and Fitzosborne, and some taxes as well that William had put in place as well. So Edwin and Morcar both fled William's court. They go north. They attempt to gather allies such as the Welsh in order to stage a rebellion against him as well. But William's key thing every single time is going to be how decisive and how quickly he acts, and how he will use the army. So he leads an army north from the south, from London. On his way, he again uses that same policy that had been so effective in getting the earls to submit in 1066, scorched earth, burns and pillages, and destroys his way up, builds a castle in Warwick, builds a castle in Nottingham, and eventually makes his way to York, in the centre of what were Morcar's lands in Northumbria, and he builds a castle there as well. Edwin and Morcar surrender without a fight. They know it's folly to take on the Norman army, and they're both kept as guests, essentially prisoners at the court of William. So that's the first rebellion. So 2 major earls rebel, and it's essentially over through William's quick, decisive action and his use of the army, and obviously again the use of castles to kind of cement that position of fear and intimidation as well. So the following January in 1069, again, we've got similar issues of resentment towards the Norman takeover, the land being taken away from Anglo-Saxons, given to William's followers, and that desire for Edgar Atheling to be king as well. That's particularly strong in the north of England. So a Norman army is attacked in Durham, in the northeast, in Northumbria. And many Normans are slaughtered and killed in the streets. In particular, the leader of the Normans in Durham, Robert Cumin, is burned alive in his own house. So it's pretty severe at this stage as well. The news spreads to York, and what we see is they lay siege to the castle in York, and it starts to get a little bit out of hand as well. And then Edgar Atheling decides that he's going to march across the border and invade as well. Again, William acts really quickly. He marches his army north. He burns crops, destroys animals, housing all along the way as well. He breaks the siege of York. Edgar Atheling flees, and he puts William Fitzosborne in charge of the north. He builds a second castle, but then he leaves. So again, it seems that he's dealt with the rebellion quite well, really quick, sent the army up, scorched earth, and 2 castles are now in York. Now, the third rebellion is the most severe, and this is because we get the same issue again. We get the north rising up yet again. We get Edgar Atheling crossing the border from Scotland, but then we get the Danes. So this time, the Danes have actually announced that they are going to help and aid. So this is a bigger problem. An Anglo-Danish army seize control of York. They slaughter the Norman garrison, and it's estimated around 3,000 of them are killed. So that's a huge number considering the population at the time as well. So the Danes are a massive threat, but William is clever, and he realizes taking them both on, the Anglo-Saxons and the Danes, is utterly pointless, and that's where he would be defeated. So he does what he will do every single time. Whenever the Danes cause a threat, he pays them off. So he pays the Danes off, they're more than happy, and they leave with a huge sum of gold. And now it's just the Anglo-Saxons. Now they've rebelled once. They've laid siege to the castle. They destroyed both the castles that William had built in York. This is where we get the full retribution of the Normans, and this is where we see the harrying of the north as well. So rather than scorched earth, this is a campaign of just annihilation and destruction that we see. So during the winter of 1069-70, all the crops are burnt, all the animals are killed, houses destroyed. They sow salt into the seeds of the crops, and they don't grow again the next year. And hundreds of thousands people starve death, and that's what they estimate. 100,000 people die of starvation. Some people sell themselves into slavery just so they can get food as well. There are reports of cannibalism in the north as well. And the Domesday Survey, 20 years later, still classes around 60% of Yorkshire as being complete wasteland. But again, we've seen the same situation, haven't we? We've seen the devastating use of the army, this time like in every other rebellion so far, and that first incident where the Danes are paid off. That's the last rebellion in the north. So after the rebellion in the summer of 1069, there are no more rebellions in the north. So really, you're seeing the northern rebellions end within a year, 1068 through to 69, end of 1069. The last rebellion, Anglo-Saxon rebellion, is the year 1070 to 1071. This is a little bit different, and this was through an Anglo-Saxon thane called Herod the Wake, who had apparently spent time in exile. He allies himself with Morcar. Morcar again turns up back on the scene again. And again, it's the similar reasons for a rebellion, resentment of the takeover. Herod had lost his land as well. The Archbishop of Peterborough had been replaced by a Norman. We know that Lanfranc will start to do that. But this time again, the Danes are involved. So the East Anglian people had made an alliance with the Danes, and King Svein of Denmark again was interested in helping the rebellion. Again, it's to get riches, it's to get plunder. And he based himself at Ely, down here. for over a year essentially, Ely is in rebellion, controlled by Herod the Wake and backed by the Danes. And again, William uses the same situation again. He bribes the Danes, which again they are more than happy to take, and the Danes therefore leave. And this time it's only the Anglo-Saxons left. This time we see again, we don't see any castles being built, but we do again see the use of the army, and Ely is sieged, and eventually the rebels are defeated. No one knows what happens to Herod the Wake. He may have escaped, he may have died, but we never hear from him ever again. But this time we see a bit more severe response from William, in that lots of the remaining rebels were mutilated, so they had their hands and feet cut off, or their eyes gouged out as well. Morcar is then imprisoned for life. So that's the end of the rebellions by Anglo-Saxons, and so 1071 is that key year really that he no longer faced threats from really his own kingdom. Now we know we get the revolt of the Earls, which we'll talk about, but from Anglo-Saxon rebellions, that's the end of it. So just a comment really then on this key topic is all about William's control of England as well, and we're going to talk about the changes in land ownership in the final video as well. And we know that he owns about 60% of the land. But William also uses some really powerful strategies to maintain his royal power. Just using force and the army to crush rebellions is not always going to work. So obviously legitimizing himself is a really key way in which he enables this control. So being crowned by the Archbishop of York, obviously not Canterbury, but still Archbishop of York, with the holy oil, with the whole ceremony at Westminster Abbey, was showing the English people that William was their king. He had to show he was legitimate. But he uses these kind of ceremonies quite a lot as well, and he introduced a brand new custom where he would be seen wearing his crown in public at least 3 times a year as well. And this would be all over the kingdom. So, royal progresses, as they're called, across the country, where people, the king and his entire court, would go around and stay with different local families and officials as well. And obviously it was a great honour to receive the king, but the people across England were seeing him. So after the rebellion of 1069, on Christmas Day, William has a ceremony in York, in the ruins of the city, obviously after the harrying of the north, again to show the people of the north, I am your king. Easter, Christmas were similar times where he would be seen wearing his crown as well. But another method he uses is obviously the coinage. We know that the Anglo-Saxon coinage was very successful. The king had the power over the coinage. So William's face here on the right, you can see this is a coin from William the Conqueror's reign as well. They would often show his royal seal, also an image of him with his name, saying that he was the king as well. And people would see these every single day, just daily reminders that he is the king, and people needed that at this time as well. He also used writs. So writs were WRITS was essentially an official royal command or proclamation as well. So William would make a direct order, like the forest laws, for example, and then the sheriffs would then, nail these onto the kind of church doors or anywhere significant in a town or village as well, so people could see them as well. So against maintaining the royal power across the entirety of the country. And as we know, oath taking and loyalty are a massive part of William's setup in how to control England as well. So they were taken very seriously. An oath was seen as a direct bond with God as well as the king, and obviously the king is sent by God as well. In 1086, when the Doomsday Survey is in progress, and there seems to be a Viking threat in 1086, William gathers all of his earls at Salisbury, and every single one of them is expected to swear an oath of loyalty as well. So he did this on many, many occasions as well. The final section of key topic 2 then is the revolt of the Earls. So as I said, we know that in 1071 the Anglo-Saxon rebellions are over. But in 1075 we see a different threat, and this, in the latter part of William's reign, is going to be the main cause of tension, is his own earls and his own Normans. And we know that later on he has problems with his own family in Robert and also his half-brother Odo. But these are two rebellious Norman earls. They were, as mentioned before, Roger of Hereford, Ralph of Norfolk, and we know that Waltheof, who replaced Morcar as the Earl of Northumbria as well. And by 1075, they were a little bit fed up. Both Ralph and Roger's parents had died, and they expected to inherit their earldoms. William had taken the opportunity to make them smaller, obviously reducing power as well, and they both felt disenfranchised with that, and they felt frustrated. Waltheof also had felt frustrated. Northumbria had been reduced in size as well, so obviously land is power in this time as well. So they decide that they're going to rebel. It was planned and coordinated at this time. William was in Normandy. We know that he spent around 80% of his time in Normandy. It's where he conducted most of his business. England was just a colony, really. Normandy was the main home. And they agree that they're going to rebel and divide the kingdom into three, between the three of them as well. Now, to increase their chance of success, they recruited the Danes, as usual. So the son of King Svein, who had been involved in the rebellion with Herod the Wake, his son Canute is willing, and he offers 200 ships as well. So a huge threat, a huge threat. Two earls in the east and west of the country, an Anglo-Saxon earl in the north of the country, and a large Danish fleet of 200 ships as well. So this is a major problem. Now we know that when William was away in Normandy, he would often assign a regent. Odo was a regent at one point, his wife Matilda, but his most important regent is Archbishop Lanfranc. So Lanfranc had become Archbishop of Canterbury in 1070. In 1075, he's ruling the kingdom in William's stead as well. Now, he obviously is in a place of trust, but Lanfranc is given help. Waltheof, for whatever reason, decides to reveal the plans of the rebellion and the plan to meet up. So Waltheof, Roger and Ralph are all going to meet up in the centre and march on London. Waltheof reveals this plan to Lanfranc. So already Lanfranc knows exactly what the plan is, so he can act decisively, just like William does in every single rebellion. He writes to Roger. He tries to negotiate to begin with. Lanfranc knew his father, William Fitzosborne. He threatens excommunication if Roger does not repent and stop the rebellion. But Roger is determined. So this is where Lanfranc could act really quickly. Odo is going to lead one of the royal armies. Lanfranc's going to lead the other, and they're going to split the rebellions in two as well. Now, this is not helped with the fact that the Danes were going to be late as well. So this lack of coordination. By the time the royal armies have split up the two rebels, William is back in England as well. So that changes the situation. He is able to pay off the Danes, as he always does. So again, we're seeing that for the third time. We see William paying off the Danes. They raid the coastline, head home very quickly. That's all they're interested in as well. And obviously then we see the kind of outcomes here as well. So Ralph of Norfolk is cornered by the rebels in Norwich. He manages to flee to Brittany in northwest of France. He leaves his wife behind as well, but she surrenders, and eventually she negotiates safe passage, and Ralph is never seen again. But Roger is captured, he's held prisoner, and he's imprisoned for the entirety of his life, and he dies in prison as well. Now, Waltheof obviously had fled, but was tricked into returning because he thought that he would be given, a second chance. William often did do that, but he was put on trial, and eventually William decides to execute him. In 1076, he's beheaded as well. So that's William's last major threat in England in 1075. The rebellion of Robert later on is in Normandy, and the issue with Odo as well, once with William Rufus when William dies, is also to do with Normandy really. So After 1075, there are no more threats to William's kingdom in England, really significant threats. So that's the end of key topic 2. So obviously William's control. So just to recap, we looked at how the Earl submitted to him, how William had to use scorched earth. We know that he used castles to cause that fear and intimidation. We saw the creation of the Marcher earldoms, so this process of rewarding followers, removing Anglo-Saxons, but also this process of Normanization. We then looked at how obviously he faced many rebellions, but obviously looking at those similar tactics used every single time, always using the army, always using scorched earth, the harrying of the north obviously being the most biggest consequence of those rebellions and the end of them, and always paying off the Danes. Looking how he obviously maintained that royal power through writs, ceremonies, legitimizing his crown, and then the final outcome then of the revolt of the Earls. So tune in next time for the final video, which will look at key topic 3, which is William's consolidation of his power. So looking at the church, the feudal system, Anglo-Saxon, Norman society, and obviously the final end of his death. Thank you.